Thank you all for just an amazing experience here. I'm going to talk a little bit about our work in Virginia. This presentation tonight is dedicated to one of my elders who passed away recently, Baba Oduno Tariq. Baba Oduno was a Garveyite who was one of the earliest activists, elder veterans that introduced me to the work of regenerative agriculture. I was probably 23, 24 when I met him in Washington, D.C. as a young member of the Universal Negro Improvement Association and African Communities League. His quote, "There is no culture without agriculture," has been resonant in my work for the last 20 years. And I would like to contextualize all of the things that we are going to talk about tonight within just his influence and giving thanks for his presence as now an ancestor. But before I go into just what we're doing and this idea of radical imagination, and then not only imagining but also a practice of actualizing a future of our world with Black people in it and Black people having space that is regenerative, but also in response to the changing of our climates. I'd like to just give you a little bit of background about myself that goes beyond just the brief bio. I have been active in Black liberation work for 2 decades, or a little over 2 decades. I started this work, or my work, as a volunteer at the Black History Museum, but it was through the founding of our annual festival, Happily Natural Day, that I was drawn into a cauldron of the wide and diverse mechanisms and practices for Black liberation across the African diaspora. It's been one work of creating space for us to resist against these ideologies of Eurocentric oppression and just, redefining what we think of ourselves in the context of being, in these colonies or what have you. But it's also been a space where I've been grown as a man, as a male, cis male, and I've been thankful to have met people like Baba Oduno who introduced me to this conversation about us being reconnected to nature. Right? So I'm going to show you a couple of things that can explain it better than I can give you words for it. I think a lot of times, we can academify and intellectualize like real world experiences. Like this work for me is very personal. It's not just like, something that we just have dialogue about. We actually do the things. So bear with me while I show you some video of Happily Natural Day. Let's see. So I showed that video because this is our 20th year anniversary celebrating an African Center Festival in the former capital of the Confederacy, Virginia, which is one of the first colonies in the United States, right? So for the last 20 years, without any type of funding from state or city or federal, we've organized a space for Black people from across the country to come together in order to celebrate their identity as people of African ancestry, but also not just celebrate, but also to network and connect with one another in order to activate practices interregionally, in order to create more activities that foster Black liberation. But out of the festival, our daily practice has been one of reclamation of space, particularly reclamation of space in formerly redlined neighborhoods, communities that were discriminated against during the 1950s around housing, places that had been disinvested by virtue of racial discriminatory policies, and most importantly, places that the built environment holds the scars of colonialization and enslavement in our community. We started our first community garden in response to the lack of access to healthy food in Richmond, in the South Side, but that work was accelerated by virtue of COVID. So when COVID happened in 2020, my meanderings and work, I landed at a botanical garden where I did trainings for community while also holding space for my own Black liberation work. But when COVID happened, the garden fired me. So, we had to figure out a way to continue doing the work. And I took my last check and turned Happily Natural Day into a nonprofit organization. And we immediately began or continued addressing, as a COVID response, increasing access to healthy food by delivering raised bed gardens to individuals across our region, right? Literally volunteers going to people's houses and giving them a 6x4 raised bed with soil and plants and saying, hey, we're here to help you grow some food, but also have something to hope for in light of this, trauma of shutdown and etc. That work caught the attention of a local museum, the Institute for Contemporary Art and Culture, where we then installed what we call the Resiliency Garden. And I'm gonna show you a video of that, and then show you where that went. So that space, this parking lot, the ICA, Institute for Contemporary Art, paid us to put together a demonstration to show what you can do in the middle of a neighborhood if there was a parking lot. We put 30-something on raised beds, trees, and murals, and etc. And once the exhibit closed, the organization said, hey, we don't have anything to do with any of this stuff, you can have it. So we went and picked it all up, and that is what became Sankofa Community Orchard. This is our 5-acre food justice and climate resiliency demonstration in the heart of Richmond, Southside. happening today as an organization. This is a Black liberation work. Our work on a day-to-day, beyond just gathering and pulling people together, has looked like, okay, how do we transform the built environment in our community to respond to both climate change as well as lack of access to healthy food? So that ecology conversation is about, okay, well, it's getting hotter in our neighborhoods. Climate change is causing, all types of maladies across, our region. All climate change impacts are hyperlocal. So in Richmond, Virginia, for our communities, it looks like it's hotter in the summer due to decisions around where trees were planted 100 years ago. The neighborhoods that I'm from, formerly red line neighborhoods, are full of impervious surface, concrete, streetscape, and it's literally hotter in those communities by sometimes 10, 15 degrees, right? I have a friend that had thermal goggles that assess the temperature. And in one neighborhood where my father grew up, he showed the goggles. It was 130 degrees in the summer. And then he took the same goggles and went to a more wealthier, predominantly white neighborhood with lots of tree canopy. It was 80 degrees. It's the same day, right? And so that has a ton of impacts on people's health, right? People die from heat-related distress. People have respiratory illness. But then on a just very practical day-to-day basis, because I'm poor, I have a higher electric bill, right? My AC is running more because I live in an impoverished neighborhood versus where the trees are. And so that plus stormwater management, where we live, because there aren't any trees, right? Or there aren't any forms of green infrastructure to soak up heavy rainfall. It's high levels of flooding in our communities. And then that also impacts the waters, the Chesapeake Bay. My friend JT will probably talk a little bit about that. But in these neighborhoods, the flooding is a reality. And then, of course, our primary focus is on growing food, so not to mention just grocery stores and things like that. So I want to share not only that work of the ecological work, but the reference back to the prior speaker who spoke about France Fanon and her focus on land. None of the work that we do is possible without us having control and tenure on land, right? We can advocate for policy changes, but without control of the physical built environment where we reside, where we live, then we don't have a real practice. We're asking someone to do something for us, but in our case, we quickly realized it was important for us to find ways to have land redistributed and for us to have the decision-making power over what that land will do and what our future will look like in our region. So what has occurred and what our imagining is, in September of 2022, we were able to acquire 85 acres of land as an act of reparative justice in our region, which looks like 80 acres in, I don't like these dichotomies of rural versus urban, but in a more rural part of Richmond, of Virginia. And then we purchased 5 acres in a more city area. And that solved for 2 problems. One, the lack of land access for aspiring Black and brown farmers who are doing the work of climate justice and food justice simultaneously, but have always struggled with the fact that the moment they start farming, somebody who's ready to develop the land or the owner of the land will say, hey, you gotta get off the land. And that has happened to me multiple times. And it also solved for the necessity for creation of relationship between rural Black communities and urban or city Black communities, and what does that interplay look like, right? For us, it looks like the development of supply chains where on scale, Black and brown people can have control of their food system, right? Through the production, the aggregation, the processing and the distribution of food in an ecologically regenerative way, while at the same time people in the city who have an aspiration to engage in land stewardship can cut their teeth on a quarter acre of land, or an eighth an acre of land, or a half an acre of land, and then begin to move on to larger parcels of property. So this is the white woman. Her name is a white woman by the name of Callie Walker, who decided that she wanted to give her land to black farmers connected with us. And deed and title. We now have 80 acres as an act of reparations. This is what the drone shot. 35 or so of the land is under forest, and the remaining is flat and ready for farms. But we're working on what that capital development looks like in order to do that. And then in Petersburg, Virginia, which is 30 minutes outside of Richmond, we have 5 acres that was purchased, and we got deed and title to us. So a white-led organization, the Agrarian Trust based out of Massachusetts, used its access and proximity to whiteness and wealth in order to raise $220,000 to purchase this 5 acres of land, which then they deeded to our black-led organization. So these are very intentional acts and decisions that were made in order for black and brown people to have control and power, because land is the basis of all power. And then lastly, I'm going to leave you with this. We are very much interested in not just like farming. This conversation is also about where will black people be, right, in the future, and how will their communities look. So our acquisition of these lands is about, okay, how do we fuse housing, right, because that is an issue, right? How can you afford a house? And this is the day and time. I mean, we just come out of pandemic. Everybody, I'm sure many of you all, even in Berlin, can imagine that the housing market was crazy and people were evicted, and there's so many folks that have experienced houselessness as a result. Even today, I'm sure that's happening in our community. I'm sure it's happening here as well. So in response to that, what we've done is we've created a community land trust to hold land explicitly for housing and agricultural purposes. And so there's a lot of different ways that this is working, but one of the most important things is that throwing back to our indigenous communities, the wisdom of our indigenous elders and those who have gone before us, like the idea of us owning land individually is a bad idea, because it puts us in a position where folks, because of capitalism, can, at any given moment decide to cash out, and that land goes right back into the speculative market, and then increase dispossession and displacement as a result. But through a community land trust, everyone that is on the land has decision-making power, right? And this entity is able to then give equity, or at least share equity with those who are building on the land, whether it be homes or farms or commercial properties, whatever the situation may be. Our most active, one of the things I'm most excited about is that we're actively working towards the building of a neighborhood, the Bensley Agri-hood. This is a 10-acre parcel of property that, in a collaboration with one of my sister friends, Angela Patton, Girls for Change, and my comrades at another land trust in our region called the Maggie Walker Community Land Trust, we're planning the building of 10 affordable homes, 4 tiny homes, a wellness center, and an incubator farm, right? So centering food as a community asset and green space as a community asset for a neighborhood that is explicitly being designed to be an affordable space for folks to live, we're like right at the zoning part. We're gotta go in front of the zoning board and have a conversation with them, and they got to say whether or not we can do it or not. So that's actually when I get back to Virginia on Tuesday or Wednesday. That's the meeting that we have to have. But essentially, this is the futurism that I want to leave you with. Is that with access to land and control over land, we, people of marginalized communities, oppressed communities, can become self-determining and can show a way forward where regeneration, where ecological stewardship, where climate mitigation, climate resiliency are all centered on the front of the work, but for the practical realities of, well, we need affordable places to live, we need food to eat, we need spaces where we can reduce our cortisol levels by virtue of being in the green, and we need to be in places where we feel safe, where it belongs to us, in a sense. So yeah, this is the work. And then last, this is all rooted in Black liberation strategies. I show this image of New Communities Incorporated. Charles and Shirley Sherrod are two pillars of Black civil rights struggle, went down into Georgia during the civil rights movement, organizing with Black farmers, and once the Civil Rights Act passed, they stayed in Georgia, and their work lived around how do they make sure that Black and brown farmers have land for housing and have land to grow food for their own communities. And we're borrowing from that legacy and iterating it into today. So thank you.
Thank you so much for those powerful, moving words and reflections. I'm so grateful to the organizers of this as well as my co-panelists. It's so funny.